Hey, so let's kind of jump into where we left off. The last thing we talked about is the industry being a people industry. And this should be fairly obvious from everything that I've mentioned so far. But if you're not in the habit of learning how to network, keeping with touching people online, obviously we can't go out to shows and stuff now, but just having a familiarity, is that the word? Having a familiar awareness of what's going on in your local scene as well as the internet vibe of what's going on is very important because who you know is going to determine eventually where you're going to reach. It's kind of the reality of it. If you sit in your room by yourself and you're an awesome engineer, unfortunately, there's a chance that nothing's going to come of that. You actually have to go out and like find work, and you have to connect with people who can lead you to bigger opportunities. Most of the jobs that I've done over the years is only because that I've known somebody who's talked to somebody and then got me in. So it's always a good way to go about things. But now let's talk about how to run a recording session. So I'm just going to take a scenario where you're in the studio and a session comes in and you have to record it, right? This will apply to live sound as well. It applies to anywhere where you have to record something. Okay? Ugh. So obviously you have to be super organized about everything. Um, Most of you guys are probably familiar with the idea of recording vocals. In theory, vocals is pretty easy to record because it is one microphone going through an interface going into a computer. And the technology today really allows you to just get solid sounds as long as you have an acoustically treated room. You can get pretty solid sounds within your own bedroom or basement or whatever, which is pretty awesome, right? But when you start thinking about recording an instrument like piano, or even worse or better, drums, or a full band, right? You start having to think about how you're going to approach the session before you even walk into the session. Because if you walked into a session and you had all this stuff to do, it'd be very tempting or very easy to slide into like a panic and be like, oh my God, I don't know what to do. There's too much going on. And that's why I always say be organized about everything that you do, whether it's your simple vocal session for your buddy or like a huge 8-piece band that's come in to go on some like Anderson Paak record or something, right? You got to just be organized the whole way through, and that'll save your life. Some of the things that you want to think about in organization is like who's the artist, what kind of genre is it, what kind of microphone do you think would work with that? But also it goes to how you save your Pro Tools sessions or the session that you're working in, how you organize that, keep that archived properly and backed up properly, and also how to deal with the clients. I've already talked about studio etiquette, but be organized about that as well, right? So um, let's talk about the booking process. I know some of you either want to get into managing a studio, and we already know that one person already does manage a studio. So basically, how it happens is an artist reaches out to the studio manager. Studio manager is like, hey, what time do you want to do? This to this. Okay, this is how much we charge. And the client's like, oh shit, I can't afford it. And the studio manager's like, well, too bad. And then the artist is like, okay, fine, we'll do it. Right? And the studio manager books the time and reaches out to whatever engineer is either on the top of his or her list, the engineer that's most reliable, the engineer that might best be suited for this particular session, whatever. There's a bunch of different factors, right? The studio manager also kind of, talks to the artist about like what do they want to record. Like, is it vocals? Is it a big band? Is it rock? Is it jazz? Classical? All these different things will go into the studio manager's head and be like, okay, who's the best engineer for this? And if we don't have somebody who might be the best for this, well, who's the most reliable? Who can I call right now and be like, hey, we got a session, let's go? That's the person who's going to get it. So this is like a quick tip to people who are going to get into the recording business. If you're going to be an engineer, kind of like what Nash said, don't just do it to get a paycheck at the end of the day. Show that you're actually there to commit and dedicate to the process, and you'll be fine. And you'll be eventually top phone call, as we call it, right? Um, cool. So there's rare cases where if the manager can't find somebody on her own team, she'll have to outsource it. I don't know why I said she. When it's like now I'm just thinking about Nash because like she mentioned that she runs the studio. But also the manager at the assistant manager at the place I used to work was a she as well. Avian Vargas. Vargas? I don't know how to say it. Love Perfection. Sure. Which one? Yeah. Go ahead. He's like an agent. He's like an agent. Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah. At the end of the day, if you're an engineer, you're a freelance worker, you're a contractor, independent contractor, which also works into your taxes. So read up on that by yourselves. Definitely something to know. If you're, we talked about how to charge people. Just remember that if you're a freelancer and you charge somebody $100, you don't actually get $100. You get like, I think it's like $84 or something. So just take that into consideration whenever you charge. Cool. So studio manager calls his or her most reliable engineer, tells them the details, and then the engineer will either call up the studio when the session's about to start, or we'll call a couple of days in advance to his assistant, be like, hey, this is the session, this is what I want to have set up, this is the time schedule, and this is how we're going to go about it. You're basically trying to make a game plan before you even go into a studio. Like I said, if you're doing a lot of these vocal tracking sessions, a lot of it is going to be last minute and you just have to react as fast as you can. What I'm talking about is more of like an ideal scenario where you have like a couple of days to prepare, like which microphones are you going to use and who's going to be my assistant on this project and how am I going to go about this. And when you have time to organize, it usually works out really well. But at the same time, you also have to be really adaptable to where somebody should just be able to throw you into a session at any point and you should be able to handle it. I remember this one time, I was on a run because I was a manager at the time, but I still did sessions, and I was on a run, and the studio manager calls me. He's like, "Oh, hey, when are you gonna be back?" I'm trying to do an impression of him, but this is the best I can do. Like, when are you gonna be back, dude? And I'm like, oh, just like 30 minutes or so. And he goes, cool. We got a drum session. You want to do it? I was like, fuck yeah, I love tracking drums. Let's get it, right? So I come back from the run. About 10 minutes prior, I had called up the assistant and be like, hey, man, can you just set up the drums in the live room and start getting these microphones? That'd be awesome. So I show up. The assistant's like putting the drum kit together and, got the microphones ready to go. And we're just about to start setting up the microphones. And then like this harp player walks in, like with a big ass harp. I'm talking like one of those big, harps. And I'm like, hey, are you here for the drum session? And she goes, I think so. I'm like, I don't know why I said drum session, but anyway. It is what it is, right? And I was like, okay, cool. And then I called downstairs to the manager. I was like, hey, there's a harp player here. I thought it was a drum session. And he's like, shit. Let me check it out. So he goes and asks. The producer and composer eventually walk in. Turns out it wasn't a drum session. It was drums, bass, harp, 4 violins, cello, vocals, guitar. So it's like okay, so that's a good question. See, as a studio manager, you're like, yo, what the fuck? I would never do that. But when you're running like a multi-million-dollar studio, it happens. Like, there's just too much coming in and out. There's too much money flowing in and out that sometimes you just get the wrong information, or you cross your wires, you think a drum session's going on there, but it's actually over there. And it happens. I'm not gonna blame anybody. So in those moments, again, one thing I could have done is like, oh shit, oh my god, I can't do this, or just step up and just like figure it out, stay calm, breathe, move the drum kit back into the booth, start getting new microphones, and prep. Just stay calm and you'll be fine. Signal flow. I gotta keep putting everything back to signal flow. If you know how to get signal from one microphone into a DAW, then you know how to get 50 microphones into a DAW. There's no difference. You just do them one at a time and you just follow the chain of command with every one. So just stay calm. There's no reason to panic about that stuff. Right? Makes sense? Cool. And this is kind of something that maybe Nash, you want to talk about. Like, do you get into the scenario where artists are like, well, I don't know what your studio is like, but setup time, is that included in the booking? Right. Right. So yeah, so this is kind of a bit of a controversial topic because it's a little bit of a gray area. Some people strongly believe that if you book 4 hours in a studio, well, the engineer is going to be there like half an hour before, and they're going to start setting up when the clock starts, and they're going to break down before the clock ends. But like Nash was saying, a lot of artists are like, "Hey, man, I'm just sitting around. Like, I paid to sing, or I paid to rap, or I paid to do this." So it's kind of a habit that if you have a session, get there like an hour early. If the room is available, and this is the only time you can do it, but if it's available, then start setting up. It'd be a good look for the client that you're prepared and ready to do this. But the problem is, huh? Say it again? Oh, did you just say damn or yeah or yeah? Hmm. Right. Right. Yeah. People are going to work with people. Yeah, the people are going to work with people who think that they're committed to their product, right? So it only makes sense. But again, this is different for different people. Like, I used to do it the way, we talked about having everything set up, but just because of my schedule and just because of the studio that I work at, it's not always possible. Sometimes there's a session that's just finishing as my session is about to start. So sometimes we have to like take 30 minutes just to set up. If you're good friends with the engineer before, sometimes you can negotiate that, but you don't want to rush their session, so it's a bit of a delicate thing. If you're in a scenario where you have to set up during your time, just talk to the artist. Just be like, "Hey man, just chill out here for a second. Here's some waters, drinks, whatever they want to do. Chill out. Let me just get everything set up and we'll get going." And they're usually okay. As long as you approach it right, people are usually okay about that stuff. So go back to like talking about the ideal scenario where you have a couple of days to prep, or you have like at least a couple of hours to prep. One thing that you might consider doing is creating what's called an input list, right? An input list is basically a list of microphones, preamps, and the basic signal flow of the entire session, really. This is just an example of an input list that I snatched from somebody. You can see that it's pretty simple. It looks like a lot, but the information in it is very, very simple. Like session date, who's the engineer, microphones that you need to use, who's the client, sample rate, bit depth, all kinds of information. But here, this center section to the bottom is the important part. He's listed out all the different instruments that are going to be involved in the session, so it looks like it's some sort of live band recording. There's vocals, keys, wind, strings, and bass, right? So there's a whole kind of like orchestral section. Then for each instrument, he's listed out the different types of microphones that he's going to use on these instruments. So for example, the bass, it looks like he's using 3 different microphones. One is Jensen, next one is the Neumann, TLM49, and the Sheps. So I guess he has 3 different microphones for 3 different characteristics of the bass. One of them is obviously DI. right? Cello, he's gotten the UM92. So basically, you see that there's a list of microphones per each instrument. Then after that, he's shown which input each of these microphones is going to go into, right? Which of them need phantom power? Which mic preamp, because remember, every microphone needs a fucking preamp. Never forget that. So which preamp is each microphone going to go into, right? Are you going to use a compressor or EQ before you go into tape or Pro Tools? And then in Pro Tools, where's it going to go and where's it going to come out on Pro Tools? It's basically the entire signal chain of the session written out. And if you're still confused by this, let's just take one example, right? Let's take the bass low. Just look at this instrument. Bass low is going to be recorded by the TLM49. It's going to go into mic line 26. You guys know what tie lines are? Have you seen tie lines or no? So have you ever seen in a studio where they have like these kind of panels on the wall where you can plug the microphones into? That's a tie line, basically, right? And usually they'll be numbered like 1 to 20, 1 to 24, and each of those will either go to a Patchbay. Well, actually not either. They will definitely go into a Patchbay, and they'll usually be normal to a console or some type of gear, right? So you got the TLM49 going into input 26. It's a condenser microphone, so it needs phantom power. Looks like it's going into a Neve preamp. It's not going to be going through any kind of compressor or EQ. And then it's going to eventually go into Pro Tools and then out of Pro Tools on channel 2. This guy was probably using the SSL console, so that's why he has a tape in and tape out. Is this making sense, or are you confused as fuck right now? Cool. Okay. Okay, so basically, let's take a vocal tracking session, right? So forget about all this. Let's just take a vocal tracking session. What's the signal chain of the vocal tracking session? You got the microphone, right? You got that going into some sort of preamp. Let's say it's a SSL preamp. And then that's going to go into Pro Tools input 1 or something, right? And then it's going to come out of Pro Tools 1 or 2 or whatever, 1 and 2. Correct? That's like signal chain, signal flow, yeah? Right? So imagine that you had to do that, but instead of just for one vocals, you had to do that for like 10, 15 instruments. You're just writing each of them out. That's it. Make sense? All right? Yes. Yeah, you can create a template of your own. This is just one example. This is the one we used to use over there. But these are available online. You can just type in input list audio or recording studio input list, and there's plenty. Or you can just make your own. And plus, I'm going to send you these slides, so you can just copy this one if you want. All right? And this is really useful for either really big sessions when you have like 20, 30 microphones that you have to worry about, or it's for when like you're not confident enough to where like you're to deal with 30 microphones and not remember where each of them go. That's really the practical use of this. Is like it maps out every single microphone, where it goes and where it ends up in Pro Tools. It's really, really useful to have. Right? Pretty cool though. Yeah? Adds the professionalism as well. And if you have an assistant, that way you're both on the same page. So okay, let's take that example of the session that I talked about where I had like all those things. So I think that was about 30 microphones, maybe 35 microphones. So what if microphone number 27 goes out, right? Like, it's so easy to just look at this and like, oh, what was 27 again? Oh yeah, it was this microphone. Oh, where did it go? Oh yeah, it's right there. So one, I'll be able to find it out easy. Two, if I'm the engineer and I have to keep the vibe going and stay with the interaction with the producer or the composer, the assistant just has to look at this input list and go straight to the source of the issue. Like, hey man, 27's not working. Okay, look, here's the list. Can you check it out and maybe change out the cable? Boom. And then I can get back to just talking to the producer and the composer and making sure they're okay because it's their session, right? So again, it kind of comes back to, as an engineer, you're not just hitting record and sitting there. You're dealing with all kinds of people. Like I told you, the Don Q thing. You're not just dealing with Don Q and recording his vocals. You're dealing with him and his boys. It is what it is, and that's kind of your job, you know. So yeah, an input list is really, really useful for that. So in the case of a scenario where you have like a full band setup, right, or many, many different types of microphones, like I said, it's really good to get there early. My personal approach is I start getting all the microphones and cables that I'm going to be using, but I don't place anything. If I have a drum kit already sitting there, I don't place any of the microphones. I just grab the microphones and cables, I put them on mic stands, but I don't place them. Can anybody think of why? Perfect. Yep. If I place all my different microphones on the drum kit, for example, and then the drummer comes in and he's like, oh, by the way, I need the snare like fucking 8 feet high. It's like, well, that kind of ruins my whole setup, right? Especially the snare when you have to think about phase and all that stuff. So it only makes sense to grab the microphones, set them up, and then when the client comes in, give them a second. Let them just hang out, you know, take their time getting ready, get their waters. Have them set up to the point where they are super comfortable with the setup, whether it's a drum kit or a cello or a violin. They need to be super comfortable. Then you place your microphones around that. Now, there are certain scenarios where that doesn't always work out, and you might have to say, like, hey, man, I'm trying to get around here. Do you mind just moving this a little bit? Is that going to bother you? Why do you think we do that? Why do they need to be in the absolute most comfortable position? That's it, man. If they're going to perform the absolute best that they can perform, they need to be comfortable. So there's this whole kind of like mindset that got developed in like, especially in like the underground audio engineering scene, where you fix it in the mix, right? That's kind of a very common thing. You fix it in the mix. And what that means is, hey, man, don't worry about the recording. Just put up a microphone and we'll figure it out later. Yeah, sometimes you can, and technology is really good now, and you can really fix a lot of shit. But I highly recommend trying it the other way, where start from the very beginning. Like, get the absolute best sound right at the beginning, and one of the factors in doing that is making sure that the musician or the artist is comfortable, is in the right vibe, and is in the setup where he can perform the absolute best. Right? And once you do that, then you can add your microphones on top of that to capture that performance. And then you have to make sure that the audio is as clean as possible. And it's basically, you're just taking care of every single step of the way. A lot of people think that the setup starts at the microphone. No, it starts at the musician. Make sure they're, or the artist rather. So make sure they're comfortable. Make sure they can express themselves. There's no point in somebody coming in and shouting out 50 verses, 50 verse takes, and none of them are usable. It's a complete waste of time. Cool. So, yeah. So, I guess another thing I've written is, if you don't have an assistant, one of the best things to do is have the interns help you. It's a great way for them to learn. If you are the intern, definitely jump on that opportunity when an engineer says, hey, I need somebody to help me with this. Don't be afraid. Don't be like, oh no, I don't know how to do that. Oh no, but no, just fucking go for it. Learn. Get your hands, or what is it? Feet wet? Feet dirty? Hands dirty? Whatever it is, do that. Do that shit. Yeah, whatever. Do that shit. Whatever it is, do that shit. Right? So once you have the microphones all placed and ready to go, your cables are all nice and neatly organized, you got your input list, you got your preamps going, that's when you start thinking about getting some signal, right? Okay, we already talked about the signal flow, but getting signal is basically, you want to make sure that your microphones are, one, working, because there's a chance that you set up a microphone and it's not actually even working. Two, you want to make sure that the signal that's coming into the microphone is a pretty healthy signal. And by healthy, I mean like averaging around minus 6 dB on Pro Tools is usually a good way to go about it. Now, if you're going to use some sort of outboard gear like a compressor or an EQ, then you need to use what's called a Patchbay. You probably already learned this in Mod 1, but a Patchbay is just really basically a hub for everything that lives in the studio. So every piece of gear that you see in the studio is connected to what's called a Patchbay. And what's the purpose of that? So that you can connect one to the other really easily instead of going back and disconnecting that and connecting it all over. Everything's set on a Patchbay. You just have to use... What cables do you use on a Patchbay? A standard one? Anybody know? 1/4 inches, yeah, but the standard ones in the studio, they use TT cables, tiny telephone. The smaller... They look like 1/4 inches, but they're smaller. Has anybody seen them? Right. Has anybody seen like those old like 40s and 50s movies where, in order to call somebody like, hey, operator, it's like, operator, who do you want to call? Like, this guy. All right, I'm patching you through. Anybody seen those? Same technology. Yeah, same technology, and the audio engineers are like, oh, we can use this. So that's basically where it came from. Cool. So when the artist, or rather before the artist gets in, you want to make sure everything's as far along as possible. Like I said, microphones are at least put on mic stands, cables are all ready to go. Make sure they have like waters, make sure the room is presentable, make sure there's not like, weed and like drinks spilled and coffee mugs all over and like paper towels. I don't know what it is, but sometimes there's always like paper towels that you have to clean up. I don't know what people are doing in those sessions. So always make sure that the room is ready to go, because if you walk in on... It's almost like if you paid for a 4-star hotel or a 5-star hotel and you walk into it and like you just see somebody's underwear lying on... Like, what? What the fuck? Yeah, I know. You can just take it and okay, that's fine. But it's like you've already killed the vibe instantly. So make sure the room is presentable and ready to go. And if it's not presentable and ready to go, if you have like a lobby or some sort of area where they can chill out, just have to chill out for a while. And if you approach it the right way, they'll usually be understanding about that stuff. Cool. So I've already mentioned, give the artist space to set up. Then you place your microphones, keep it as neat as possible. One thing about keeping cables neat, it's not always possible when you're on a time crunch and people are paying, $100 an hour, $125 an hour. They might be very hesitant to see you just like, making sure the cables are all nice and neat. But one of the reasons why we do that is so that somebody doesn't just fucking trip over this thing and unplug something or move a microphone. Sometimes if you move a microphone by like 2 inches, the whole sound is gone. So try to keep them as neat and presentable as possible. Right? Not going too fast, am I? Okay, cool. You guys were slow with that response. Oh, that's cool. I told you, man. In person is way better, but oh well. Cool. All right. Good. So, artist comes in. You've already set the room up. You got your microphones on mic stands. He set up his drum kit or whatever. You place the microphones. You got signal, or rather you're getting signal on the microphones. Now it's time to actually get signal for the project. And this is kind of alluding to what I talked about, getting a healthy signal, right? So if you're going to be capturing sound, you don't want to just have the artist, tap the microphone, or you don't want to just have him like just say random words in the microphone, or you don't want to just have him play a random beat. You want to have him do almost like a warm-up performance to the song. So if it's a drummer, you just be like, hey man, can you just play like a little section of the song so I can get some levels? Why is that? Or if it's an artist, if it's a rapper, you don't want to have him just say, hey, check 1, 2, this is a good day to be alive, coronavirus, blah blah blah, right? You want him to actually perform the song a little bit, just so that you can get levels. Somebody tell me why. Good. Yeah, because if not to go back to Casanova, but like, although Casanova talks loud, but if you're recording Casanova and he just like says, yeah, whatever in the microphone, he's like, oh, I got levels, and then he starts rapping, it's two different levels, completely different levels, and you're just gonna ruin whatever performance he just did right there, right? You never want to do that. Never want to do a Trey Songz thing like I did. You always want to catch it right, right? So have them do like a warm up performance to it, just so that you can get levels, set your compressor, set your EQ, and again, try to go back to that whole idea of getting it right from the beginning. Don't just say like, "Oh, I'll fix the distortion later." No, no, stop. Or, "Oh, I'll EQ it later." Well, if you can EQ it now, do it. Or, "Oh, I'll compress it later." Especially vocals, 99% of time you're recording vocals, you're going to be compressing it. I don't care if it's rap, singing, voiceover work, audiobooks, whatever it is. You're always going to be doing some sort of compression to it, right? But yeah, you want to get a signal that's going to be best for the performance that this guy is going to actually give, right? Does that make sense? And the better you get at it, the faster you'll be able to go. So, sometimes it takes somebody an entire verse or chorus to figure it out. Sometimes it only takes an engineer a couple of lines to figure out where he's going to be. A good question you could ask the person is like, hey, is there like a section, like the loudest section? Can you just play that? And then you can be like, okay, I'm going to adjust my levels according to that. That way nothing ever clips, right? Do you guys know what clipping is? Or distortion, rather? Yeah, whenever you push any piece of gear beyond its recommended calibration, it goes into this whole sort of distortion phase, right? So for analog gear, if you start pushing it, like if you start turning up the gain louder and louder, you're gonna get distortion. The thing with analog gear is you get these kind of overtones, which cause this really nice saturation to it. With digital distortion, like in Pro Tools, if you just crank up the fader, you're gonna get digital distortion, and that's your computer basically saying, hey, mathematically, I don't know what this information is, so I'm just going to chop it off, basically execute it at the head, right? And I'm not going to say that that sounds bad, because that technique has been used a lot, especially in the last decade, the whole digital clipping. So it's not a bad thing, but I'm just saying, what's the vintage engineers fry me for this? Like, what? Digital clipping is the worst. Like, come on, bro. Update yourself. Right? So, sure. Yes. I think like 95 to 99% of the artists I've ever worked with want to take a second to just get in the zone. Right? They probably just got off the subway or an Uber, or came back from a fight with their parents or something. Just need a second to just hold on. Let me just like chill. Let me just get in the zone. Again, like it comes down to they need to give you a good performance, so they need to do whatever it takes, to give you that performance. You know what I mean? Yeah. You know what I've noticed, dude? It's like someone's mic is on. We still haven't figured out how we're gonna deal with it. Anyway, what I've noticed is that the people who want to start right away, one, either are unbelievably focused and just don't have time to do anything else, which is very, very rare. The other side of it is usually the people who are like, yo, bro, like they're super fucking, it's the politically right word to say. No, they're super conscious of the money they're spending, so they're just trying to, fuck, we gotta get it done. Oh my god, like, no, bro, you're not we could do that, but you're already nervous and angsted out. You're not going to give me a good performance. Chill for a second. Let's just chill out for a second. Get into the zone, or else if you're just going to get into this mindset of like, oh my God, but my money, it's like, yeah, that money's already gone. We already charged you, bro. So just chill. Just chill. Get in the zone. Do it right. So yeah, it's usually that, and 99% of them are like, let's just chill for a second. Like, especially when I have artists, like if I do sessions at my place, in my studio back there, it's like we'll talk for like 30 minutes, 40 minutes, just chill. And I won't even charge for that time. It's just like, let's just chill, man. You know, make them coffee. Just get into the right zone. And then we go in there and kill it. I've noticed that works better for everybody. Yeah, makes sense. Cool. I guess the only thing I'd add to that is I understand. I don't want to come across like I'm shitting on people who are like nervous about spending their money, because if you're booking out like $125 an hour studio, I understand that you have to be concerned, but I still think like, bro, that money's gone. You already committed to this, so just chill. We'll be okay, right? So I get it, but I disagree with it. Cool. Okay, so kind of some takeaway points is that you got always make sure that you're paying attention, and this is something that Nash talked about yesterday. That again comes back to if you're passionate about this, if you want to actually dedicate and commit yourself to this, it's like pay attention to what's going on. Like I said, keep the vibe going all the time. Always be aware when there's a dip in the vibe and try to bring it back up. Always pay attention to the audio, especially when you're working with like 30 different microphones, 35. You gotta listen really carefully for the errors that occur in the audio. You have to catch that and address it. The worst thing that you could do is record something with distortion or some sort of weird clip and send it to the clients. Probably never going to work with you again, right? Unless like they know you and you're super reliable and it was just an accident. Try not to do that. Listen to things that like, you know, are dictating the energy of the artist. Like, does he need water? Does he need to take rest for a second? Catch his breath? Whatever, right? Keep an eye on all that stuff. Now, if you want, I kind of mentioned right here, if you want extra brownie points, which is actually what you should be doing all the time anyway, is keep track of the good takes. This is something that catches almost every artist offhand, but they fucking love you for it. If you're doing like multiple takes of a chorus, and then you do the rest of the song, and then you come back and be like, oh man, I did this cool take in one of those. I'm like, oh yeah, it's take number 43 or whatever, or take number 3, right? They'll love you for that because you're paying attention. You actually give a shit about what's going on right now. If you have some sort of like musical inclination, if you can tell when something's out of key, it's not a bad thing to bring that up. Now, obviously, you have to sense the vibe of the artist and everything. If he's just some like crazy guy who just wants to do some Yoko Ono shit, then hey, don't say shit. Just let him do his thing, right? You just keep that Yoko vibe going. But if it's somebody who's like an actual singer who's trying to like put out a really solid pop song or country song or, you know, hip hop record or whatever, and if like there's something that's out of key, you can be like, hey man, why don't we just get one more of these? Sometimes singers don't like it when you say, oh, you're kind of flat. Like try to phrase it in the positive instead of the negative. Like, don't be like, hey man, you're out of key over here. Like, be like, hey, do you think we could get this again? Or even play it back for them. A lot of them will be like, oh shit, I could do that better, right? So that's extra points because again, you're paying attention. You actually give a shit about what's going on. Listen to the conversation. So this is something like I mentioned yesterday. Like, if it's Don Q and like 15 of his guys, right? If one of them is like, man, we're starting to get hungry over here, just like you got to be, while you're recording him and while you're trying to make sure that audio is clean and he's in a good space, you know, just make a note. Like, go call the intern. Like, hey man, can we get a menu up here? Boom. Takes 2 seconds. They're gonna be happy about it, which is gonna make him happy about it. And you got good audio, and you're totally killing it on all levels. They're gonna love you for that. So it's. I think by now it's probably clear that being an engineer is a lot more than you guys might think it is. There's so much that goes into being an engineer. And I have to tell you guys this now because, you know, um, some people don't know and it kind of kills. Well, I mean, Nash will tell you, right? It's like those people don't get called back, so. So makes sense. Mm-hmm. I would, yeah, I would say if you're a seasoned engineer and you know what you're talking about, it's okay to say that. But if you're, yeah, yeah, mm, right. But I will say that once you get more and more seasoned, and you should not do this until you're actually fully confident, not even confident, that you actually have proven yourself and done great sessions and like done great mixes. Once you get to a certain level, then artists will respect your opinion in like certain ways because artists inherently are insecure at times about their performances. Sometimes they're like, "Oh, I don't know." If they trust you enough, they'll let you say something like, "No, don't worry about it, man. I can totally fix that later." Like it's very tempting or very easy for artists to get in their own head and they can go into this whole spiral of just like trying to do 100 takes to get this perfect thing. It's like, bro, we got it. Don't worry about it. Sometimes when you're a seasoned engineer, you should be saying those things. But if you're just starting out and you're trying to just learn the ropes and everything, it's probably better to just like let him do it a couple more times. So, yes, yes, please do.